Module 2 also will be given over 2 days. Today, Dr. Sahar Abdul Rasul from South Africa is going to talk about the adult learning theories learning theories, and also about designing a teaching course. And tomorrow we have two other speakers from UK. Dr. Mohammed Al-Uzri will talk about adult learning, and Dr. Hassanin Al-Tayyar will talk about active versus passive learning. As you know, that the course that we are doing consists of 6 modules. It started usually 2 weeks ago, and it will end in October 2021. And the attendee have to complete the 6 modules in order to get the certificate of the course, as well as anyone who won the certificate have to pass through the assignment or homework, which will be allocated by the presenter during each module. As a reflection from the first module, there was very good participation, active participation of the attendee, and we were pleased to their comments and their reflection, and we want them to continue on the same line during the other modules. Today, Dr. Omnia from Baghdad College of Medicine will be the moderator of this session, and together with our lovely team, Mustafa Abbas, Mustafa Ismail, Rami, Bishara, and Zainab, all they are assisting me in executing this module. By the way, a positive achievement today is that the Royal College of Physicians in London praised our work, and they were very pleased about the outcome till now. And the newsletter of this month is pointing to that issue, is that Iraq is doing a very useful network, and they want to be spread to other area in the MENA region, as well as other area in the world. Thank you for all who participated in our teaching courses, and thank for my colleagues from everywhere in Iraq who support me to do this national task. And a special thanks to the lovely team working with me from medical student. They prove they will be the leader of the future. May I call my colleague, Dr. Omnia Rafid from Baghdad College of Medicine, to moderate the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hilal. Good evening, everyone. Congratulations on reaching Module 2. So this is Omnia again. I'll be accompanying you tonight, and I'll make sure you don't get bored. So before we start, we need to talk about some ground rules. We value time here, and here I say we value time tremendously. So we hope to keep the session well organized and neat. If you have a question, kindly write it down in the chat box, and I'll deliver them all to Dr. Sahar at the discussion time. And if you have something, you want something to be cleared, you're more than welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself so that you can interact with the doctors directly. And please do not worry about the PowerPoint presentations or the recording of the session, as it will be uploaded accordingly on our official social media. So while I am talking now, I will be posting at the chat box our official social media so that you can access them all. And I highly suggest that you subscribe to our Telegram channel, as there you will find the learning materials, presentations, and all the assignments posted. So I guess enough me talking, and Dr. Sahar, please, we are all ears and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about the theories of learning. Dear Omnia, can you please allow me to share my screen?
Okay, Dr. Sahar.
I'm fine, thank you. So today I'm going to talk about the theories of learning. And of course, the theories of learning is written by several theorists, but it all pulls into four main streams. So, and those theorists are either psychologists or they are philosophers. So many of them are concerned with children's psychology. So the summary for this lecture is going to be an overview of the four major theories of learning. And these are the behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and the last one is connectivism, which is very rife nowadays among the millennial generation. And we will talk about the relation between these learning theories and the instructional design of our courses in medical education, and the relevance of connectivism to medical education and online distant learning during the pandemic. To start with, the intended learning outcome is to list and define the four major theories, and we are going to explain certain terminology like positive enforcement, negative enforcement, stimulus versus negative enforcement, and the zone of proximal development. And we will assess the strength and the relevance of each theory to be able to determine the most possible way or structure during designing the learning activities and the course design in the lecture that follows this one. To start with, learning is a complex process. It involves mental processes which are influenced by emotional and environmental factors, and this can either support or hinder learning. Over the past century, the educational psychologists and researchers have posited many theories to explain how the individual acquire, organize, and deploy skills and knowledge. The learning theories that are grouped, as we said, there are many theorists, but all the theorists, all the epistemology is channeled into four main directions. That is behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and connectivism. And these theories are, or the four main streams, are arranged here in a chronological fashion. So the behaviorism is the oldest, and it was followed by cognitivism and then constructivism. And the last theory has predominated in this century. So what is behaviorism? It is the study of an observable behavior. So the theorists believe that knowledge exists outside the person, and it's gained through behavioral modification. So the learning is observed by a change in behavior, and this change of behavior can be either stimulated or inhibited by positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Who are the major theorists in this theory? The first one is Pavlov, and he did the classical conditioning, and you can see in the corner of my presentation the theory. They used to present dogs with food, then they associated that with the stimulus, and that's the whistle, and then the dog, they started presenting the food with the whistle, and then the dog started to regard the whistle as a stimulus, so he used to salivate even if the food is not presented upon hearing the whistle. There is a second type of conditioning, and that's called the operant conditioning, and this is very much related to reward and punishment. So when the rat presses one of the buttons, he gets electrocuted or shot, and when he presses the second button, he gets the food. So with time he starts realizing which is the right button and what should he press to get rewarded with the food. Behaviorism application in education. I'm sure we all can relate to behaviorism. So usually the classroom is instructor-centered, the student is passive or inactive. And the instructor usually develop an objective or a curriculum to focus on the level of learning desire, and even he designs the learning tasks, and he provides feedbacks to the students, and he rewards them for their appropriateness of behavior, providing motivation and engagement, different types of rewards. I'm sure we all can relate to that in our primary education. So the learner's role is to respond to the content that is provided by the instructor, and to demonstrate a level of performance with regard to the specific goals and objectives. And the behavior of the learner is modified and conditioned by the rewards and punishment. So, and this can, of course, take different forms. It can be in the form of prize, or it's in the form of high grades versus low grades, accolades, different types of reward. And the rewards are considered as a positive enforcement versus the punishment, which is a negative enforcement. So the reinforcement is very critical to the process of learning, as the behaviorists think. The type of learning that is experienced with such type of theory is learning happens through repetition, and it's based on recalling facts, defining concepts and explanation, and performing certain procedures. The instructional strategies, he drill and practice activities. There is repetition, there is identifying of tasks and skills, goals and objectives, and design specific objectives to achieve these goals. So from practical perspective, behaviorism manifests an educational environment as rewards for high performance, attention, praise, good grades, recognition, achievement, awards, access to opportunity, or loss of privileges, suspension, disciplinary measures, academic probation when the student failed to constantly demonstrate the desired behavior. Okay, so this is the theory. What is the criticism, or my criticism against this theory? So if this theory might be useful when in primary school, I think we continue with this theory forever in our education. The problem with that type of teaching is that although the teacher is an expert and he has all these connections and all that integration of information, the lecture, which is 1 hour most of the time, is his way of transferring the information to the student. So although the information in the mind of the teacher is very well integrated, this is presented as a chain to the student, as you can see in number 1. And that same chain will be received by the student. And as a consequence of that, the student will choose always to memorize the taught material rather than engaging in new knowledge construction. So usually university teachers tend to present simple narrative sequence to their students, and that is what the 1 hour lecture allows, and is usually constructed out by, although it's constructed by underlying very complex ideas, that is not what the richness does not get to the student. So the student does not get that richness of integration of information. The way of the design looks like that. So the learning outcome, the student has a prior learning. You can see it here in these beige circles, and he chooses to add information to his prior learning. And then that is, it's a simple, the way he learns is by simple repetition of what his instructor has said. And with time, he might lose part of these building blocks of that chain, and he reaches a stage of non-learning. So when he loses 1 or 2 of these blocks, he won't be able to construct the chain anymore. Rote learning is not in my, it can apply to a certain percentage of learning. The theory is still valid, but it is not the ideal way of learning. The second theory is called Cognitivism, and that is more recent than behaviorism. And the Cognitivism is still, you can see that I put a picture of a person with the mind, and there is a light here. So this theory is mainly concerned of what happens in the brain as a result of learning, and it focuses on the long and short memory and how do we retrieve information. So knowledge still exists outside the person, according to Cognitivism, and it gains through we gain information through information. We gain knowledge through information processing. We focus on how human memory works to acquire knowledge and promote learning. So there is a change in the memory structure. And this change is usually how the change happens, how do we retrieve the information, and this is the main principle of Cognitivism. So how the learners acquire specific type of strategies through planning, monitoring, and evaluation. So what do the cognitivists believe? The cognitivists believe that if you present the information to the student or to the learner in a polished form with emphasis on the main concepts and ideas, that will help in the process of recalling the information, in the process of storing the information and recalling the information. So you basically remove the redundant part of the information that the student does not need. And if I give you an example, like when I want to teach the student about the musculoskeletal system, and I'm explaining the muscle, I point out to the student that I want him to know the attachment and to know the nerve supply and the action of the muscle, because that will help him in knowing the action, and it also helped me in teaching clinical application like paralysis due to nerve injuries, and I just remove the redundant part like the morphological shape of the muscle and how does it look. So you usually focus on the main aspect or main concepts and arrange it in a scaffold. So it is based on, it centers around scaffolding the information so that the student is able to retrieve the information. So the learner plays an active role in learning by organizing the information and successful processing it in long-term memory so that he can recall it, remember it, and he can transfer it to others. The instructor continues to determine the learning outcome and direct the learning with additional application of specific information processing strategies. Like in the cardiology course of Prof. Hilal, so that he puts the boxes around the main information, he puts the clips, parts of the ECG. So these are all, it helps the student to learn what we aspire him to learn. So we can, to facilitate learning, the learning environment should be arranged in a way to maximize this learner ability to retrieve a prior knowledge. And usually we give organized content so that he can integrate the newly acquired knowledge with his past experience or with his prior knowledge. Of course, I wanted to find what does the word scaffolding mean in Arabic. So it says saqala, and I Googled the picture and that is the that kind of structure that you do when the worker wants to reach the roof or paint something at the top. So that's exactly what we do with the student. We want him to build on his prior knowledge in a very constructive way and to be able to recall that information and to be able to retrieval and transfer of the information. So cognitive learning activities, we can give problem solving, and this usually focus on breaking down problem solving activities. It focuses on breaking down complex problems into component parts and relating it to the content to be known with the prior knowledge. There is the main theorist for cognitivism is called Robert Garnier, and he has designed something called the 9 levels of learning. We said we cannot talk about these theories without mentioning the theorist. So he talks about these 9 levels of learning and he puts it into that way, and that is gaining the learner attention, informing the learner of the objectives. And you can see that I put one of the course design. So you put a summary, and that is the learning objective of the lecture, for example, and then you give the learning outcome, and you describe to the student exactly what is going to happen. So you inform the learner about the objectives and what is known as the organizers. So we provide module organizers to the students, and these module organizers list the contents of the course, the lectures and the practicals, and we elaborate on what each lecture or practical entails and what is the learning outcome for each lecture. And so this usually helps to stimulate recall of prior learning, provide guidance and elicit performance, and then we provide feedback. This process of organized learning usually helps in making the student integrate their prior learning with the newly acquired material, and it helps in retention. So through the long memory and recall of this information, and also he will be able to transfer the information. So it's a better scaffold than the behaviorism. What kind of pedagogies? Pedagogies is a word meaning طرق التدريس. Instructional, or the instructional design that is related to cognitivism. We use memory aids, advanced organizer, as you saw, and meaningful learning is achieved through focusing on the learning objectives in each lecture. And also individual and social opportunities to actively engage with concepts and constructs. The third theory that we are talking about is Constructivism, and major theorist of Constructivism is sorry, I didn't put the slide, the word Constructivism here. So the major theorist is John Piaget, and I don't know whether you've been exposed to John Piaget before or not. So I think Dr. Mohammed Al-Uzri will talk about him tomorrow. So this is one of the cognitive constructivists, and he's a Swiss child psychologist. And then this guy was asked at a certain point of his life to translate intelligence test, IQ test from English to French. And then when he applied it to the children, he discovered that the children had failed in solving, younger children had failed in solving questions or intelligent questions that is related to the logic. So he came with the theory that cognition, or cognition is developmental, and he came with the cognitive developmental theory, which explains how the child constructs a mental model of the world. And he thinks that this is an evolving, it is not a fixed trait. So intelligence is not a fixed trait, it grows and evolves with age. So he described the cognitive development theory as a process of biological maturation and interaction with the environment. And there are many components that is attributed to the cognitive development theory, and that is the schemas, and these are the building block of knowledge, or memory structure where prior knowledge is stored for retrieval. and the adaptation process. And this enables the transition from one stage to another. So the brain, these blocks, and the brain is in a state of equilibrium, and we process new knowledge through accommodation and assimilation, and then the brain goes back to the equilibrium again. And he listed 4 stages of cognitive development: the sensory-motor stage from birth, 2 years. The main achievement is object permanence, knowing that the object still exists even if it's hidden. يعني شايفين الأطفال من يلعبون ختيلة. So if he sees his brother behind the curtain, although he cannot see his actual brother, but he knows that his brother is hiding behind the curtain. The pre-operational at the age of 2 to 7, and young children can think about things symbolically, so they can make a word or an object stands for something other than itself. And we can see that with young children. So they will use certain words, and it's not really the exact word, but it refers to something in that child mind. And then we have the concrete operational stage, and this represents a major turning point in cognitive development. It marks logical or operational thoughts, number, mass, weight can be observed, and the formal operational is at the age of 12 and up. So that is application of abstract concepts and logically test hypotheses. So we can see that the intelligence is something that is developing as the child grows up. This is very important to know, and it is used in several schools in Finland where the students are enrolled at the age of 7. So they think that this is a much better age than the age of 6, because he is now in that concrete operational stage, and he can understand the principles of math and biology in a much better way. Lev Vygotsky is a Russian psychologist, and this guy has developed the social developmental theory, and he thinks that socialization affects the learning process. And this guy came with very important principles in education. So he has the role of social interaction. He acknowledges the role of social interaction in cognitive development. So he thinks that social learning lies ahead of development. The more knowledgeable other, and that is anyone, it's not necessarily an instructor, that helps you in who has a higher knowledge or ability than the learner, and with respect to a particular task or a process and or a concept, and he can train you. And there is the zone of proximal development, what the learner can do without help, and what she and he can achieve with the help of what is known as the more knowledgeable other. So this is very important diagram that shows that zone of proximal development. So we stand here when we arrive to college from the grade 12. So this is the stage. This is where prior learning is acknowledged here, and then there is the where the learning outcome where we want the student to be, and in between that there is this zone of proximal development. What we can make the student achieve through the more knowledgeable other, and the person who can instruct the learner or help the learner to achieve that. That zone of proximal development is very important. They think that active learning and engagement is most powerful if you can keep the student in the zone of proximal development. So until he reaches the stage where independent learning takes place and he can count on himself to learn. So the more he climbs up the ladder, the less assistant he is going to need from you. The other guy who affected education very much is Benjamin Samuel Bloom, and he is an American educational psychologist, and he is very much known for the Bloom's taxonomy. And many people argue that it is a taxonomy is rather than a theory. This focus, he thinks that the focus of the instruction should be the time required for different students to learn the same material. So you recognize their prior knowledge, and he thinks that not all the students have the same prior knowledge, so they don't stand at the same level. And there is a way which we are going to talk about in the next lecture of course design, where you acknowledge that differences and you try to minimize the differences between students. So the key element he is clearly specifying what is to be learned, and that is the learning outcome, and how we evaluate the learning outcome. And we allow the students to learn at their own pace, assessing the student progress and providing appropriate feedback. There are means of providing feedback, and testing their final learning criteria has been achieved. So you need to design the learning outcome of the course, and you need to test whether these learning outcomes had been achieved by the student. Of course, the Bloom taxonomy is more than a taxonomy. He also acknowledged the learning domains like affective domain, interpersonal domain, the psychomotor domain, and cognitive domain. And there is something very important in that slide that I want you to read. And it says that lower level of learning, lower levels within each domain reflect the learned knowledge and the skills from existing bodies of knowledge. So responses are either correct or incorrect. Higher levels reflect learner-generated, meaningful, and solutions where they are not fixed but explored. So that is what I tried to achieve, by the way, when I gave you the assignment. There is no right solution and wrong solution. There is a number of solutions that we can generate to solve that assignment. So we're talking about the Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm going to talk about the assignment that I've given, and that some of the students had found a bit difficult. So you can see that at the bottom here we have the learning and understanding. So these are the lower cognitive domains in that Bloom's taxonomy, and in the middle you have the applying and analyzing. And at the top of that pyramid, which this part refers to the high cognition, we have evaluating and creating. So if you still remember, the first question was a simple application of the previous lecture. I asked about the search engines that can be used. And again, this question had wrong and right answers. It had no wrong and right answers. You listed the search engines that I've mentioned in the lecture, but there are many other search engines that you can know about. Then we moved to analyzing and applying when I asked about what words you are going to punch in the search engines. I moved to analyzing and applying because I presented a graph, and the words that you are going to, a pie chart, and the words that you are going to punch in the search engine is very much relevant to your interpretation of the graph. So what was the graph talking about? So that is applying and analyzing. What made the students a bit, I think, irritated is the last bit of the assignment, where I suddenly jumped to creating and evaluating when I asked you to write 3 small paragraphs about the chart. So this is actually, this is the non-comfort zone to any student, and maybe to many of the lecturers and instructors, including me. So creating and evaluating is pushing your brain to think with its full capacity. So you push the student to the higher cognitive level. And in this course of ours, I mean, there is no real assessments. It's not for marks. You are not passing or failing. You're getting a certificate. But, and you felt that a bit of uncomfortable. And I can understand that. I can relate to that. Because students usually feel uncomfortable when they get a question in the exam that entitle them to think, use higher cognitive function in their thinking. So, or relating to creating an evaluation. So creation and evaluation. So the student comes and he had memorized the lecture and he's expecting questions at this level. We try to set the assignments at a higher than the anticipated level. And this keeps the student in the zone of proximal development, and it will encourage him to learn. So I would set a meeting with you and we will solve that assignment together, and I might be able to teach you a few more small things that will really make the knowledge more concrete. So constructivism is the third theory. It's more recent than the other two. And this is mainly based that the student construct learning. So if you can see, there is a picture here, and that picture is of a class. And you can see that here the teachers are having, they are now moved to a more passive role where they are just like observing the learning process rather than being an active participant. So they asked, you can see here, it says bury treasury in trash. And I'm sure that she is, the instructor is allowing some of the students to construct that type of project. And then she will use the project to explain certain things to the rest of the students, like waste disposal, maybe its effect on the environment. So that is the way that the student construct knowledge. And this way is very much adopted by all the postgraduate classes, all the teaching classes in the West. So the main theorist is John Dewey, and he is a philosophical founder of the approach. He believes that a human being learns through hands-on approach. And this places him in the educational philosophy of pragmatism. So pragmatists believe that reality must be experienced. So he's a more of a philosopher than, but his theory is adopted by education. So his educational point of view is that the student must interact with their environment in order to adapt and learn. So the instructor acts as a facilitator. He doesn't really plays a very active role. He facilitates students' learning, and he focuses on the integration of skills and knowledge in a real-world practice, and scaffold the learning experience in the zone of proximal development. Again, we have the prior knowledge, and we have the part that we want to achieve an independent learner, and the instructor is the more knowledgeable other who helps the student to achieve that independent learning stage. The learner is a very active participant, construct knowledge socially with peers. Constructivism, social constructivism, or social learning theory is that the learning is based on connection to the prior knowledge, and the teachers are facilitators, and they monitor the learning process closely and make adjustment if it is needed. Multiple intelligences are considered, and I'll talk about the multiple intelligences at the end of the lecture. Teachers consider the stages of development and motivations for behaviors. And then the humans usually have a hierarchy of needs that must be met according to a certain theory. This lets me move to show you that theory. So there is a famous theorist who says that there is a hierarchy of need, and that's Maslow's, Abraham Maslow's. And you can see here psychological, safety, love, esteem, self-actualization. And you need all these, all these are needs that should be fulfilled before the student be in an optimal condition for learning. So you cannot teach a student who is hungry. This takes place in our schools. There is a meal that is offered to the students during the learning classes, because that meal is the only thing, the only meal that the student takes throughout the day. So these are all important aspects that should be considered in learning. We need a positive environment, in another word. The impact of constructivism on education has been very considerable. So it shifted the role of the teacher from the sage on stage, you know, he's giving the lecture, he's instructing, to being a guide on the side. And I think you have practiced that in problem-based learning, where there is a moderator who sits and he makes sure that the process is going smoothly, but he rarely interferes. I taught in problem-based design, and then the students usually exchange information, and the learning happen as a result of student integration and exchange of information. So the role of the learner also shifted from that of being a passive recipient of information, and it's usually now it's modeled back for feedback and assessment in a highly active environment. So one's own knowledge and developing the skill is based on experimentation. I mean, the learner knowledge and skills are based on experimentation and interacting with the learning environment. What are the pedagogies? How do we do constructivism? Of course, there are many ways where we can allow the student to construct information. And one of them is the flipped classroom. You give the learning material to the students prior to the lecture. I think that what was happened with our lectures. We were asked to give it beforehand, the notes beforehand. And there is, of course, these peer learning and informal groups as the problem-oriented learning. There are groups that get constructed for a certain purpose or towards a certain project or certain learning tasks. And one of the things that I don't know whether you've experienced it or not is the clickers. The clickers is a very good constructive pedagogy. And the clickers are certain instruments that gets distributed to the students during the lecture. And if you haven't seen it, it's something very similar to Men Sayarbah al-Million or Slam Dug Millionaire, where usually the person who is participating in that program asks the opinion of the audience, and the audience reply to the question, and then there is bar charts that gets constructed as a result of the reply of the audience. So we have these clickers at the university, so we get 80 clickers, we have 80 clickers, and we can bring a small group like the dentistry group, they are less than 80, and then you give the student a clicker after the lecture. You dedicate 10 minutes, and you construct MCQ, multiple choice questions, that test the major concepts of the lecture or the major ideas that were propagated in the lecture. And the students will answer through the clickers, and then it gets converted into bar charts over your computer. And then you can see in real time what is the concept and what is the information that the student failed to grasp through the answers. So this is a very interactive and very active way in construction. Another theorist is Jerome Bruner, and Jerome Bruner is the inventor of the spiral curriculum. And he thinks that the main ideas or the main concepts of a program should be revisited. So in a variable degree of, increasing degree of complexity as the student advances in his studies. So all these, and that's why it's called the spiral curriculum. So you revisit the main ideas, the main concepts every time, every year in the same curriculum, and with the variable degree of complexity. You increase the complexity of the topic every time you present the topic. So this is a very reinforcement method. So you reinforce the information over time, and the students get a mastery of content and deeper knowledge as of the topic when the contents are revisited. Of course, he is one of the children's psychologists, so he believes that there is 3 modes of representation of knowledge, or 3 ways that the knowledge is stored in the memory. Inactive method, where the age is between 0 and 1, and representation of knowledge is through actions. The child can look into a book, browse a book, a very simple book, and look at the figures. The iconic is the stage from 1 to 6 years, and that is image-based. And then the symbolic or language-based at the age after 7 onwards. So just a summary to these 3 major theories. Learning is achieved through transmitted information in behaviorism, acquisition and arrangement of knowledge, and in cognitivism, and construction of knowledge in constructivism. Learning is believed to be a change in behavior in behaviorism, and it's built on previously learned material. We talked about zone of proximal development, and in constructivism, it's a change of meaning because as a result of interaction with the environment. The behaviorism is instructor-centered. It depends on the teacher, lecturer. The cognitivism and constructivism is, the cognitivism is again instructor centered in the mean of that the cognitivism consider the instructor as the more knowledgeable other, who helps in achieving that or passing through that zone of proximal development to move from being, being dependent to an independent learner. And the constructivism is very much student-centered, and it's practiced in many classes and in the major universities. So usually there is small sessions, and then the ideas gets discussed, and that is how the lecturer interact with the student. The last theory in this lecture is connectivism. I hope I haven't past my time. I will just use 2 more minutes. Connectivism is one of the newest educational theories, and this is very much related to the millennial generation, and that is, we like to target them in their comfort zone, and then it assumes that people learn and grow when they form connections. So the more connections that it's formed, the more ideas are exchanged. And this theory has many drawbacks. Firstly, when the student learns through connection, there is no arrangement of ideas, no filtering. So he will learn useful information as well as many redundant information. There is no actual tasting. It's very much student-centered method. You cannot really assess what the student has learned. Also, although they are working on, because of the pandemic, they are working on developing more refined methods of assessment for connectivism and applying connectivism as a method of learning. It relies heavily on technology, and it needs the instructor role is also a bit passive, as this theory assumed that the computers and most of the digital means know much better than the instructor. It has more information. and that I'm sure you heard about the artificial intelligence, and it's also related in a way to connectivism. So knowledge is distributed across a network of connection, and the learning is the ability to construct and traverse this network, and it is not really being measured in a proper way, because also when you learn, you need a certificate of learning, so it doesn't really cope very well with learning. So millennial learners needs are not sufficiently being met by the traditional training models. You know, they like to rely heavily on their phones, mobiles. So we have introduced technology in our teaching, and the idea of introducing technology, we introduce blogs, we introduced YouTube videos, and many other technologies, poll everywhere. It's a way, it's something with an idea similar to the clickers, and that is now WhatsApp groups. There are a lot of WhatsApp groups, Facebook pages. All these are used for instructional material, and this is because we need to target the students outside of in their comfort zone and the time that is outside the lecture usually. So this is the advancing technology allowing the student to connect with one another, and these networks, the bigger, they believe the bigger the network, the better the learning experience. Learning occur through connection, as I said, and the educator can follow the blogs of those who innovate with educational technologies, experiment with web service and tools. I have constructed a blog for the students to learn, use, publish, and share resources through blogs, wikis, video sharing, so YouTube videos. All these are considered methods now of learning through connectivism. Just, I would like to touch on Howard Gardner. That's going to end. My lecture is about to end. So Howard Gardner believed in multiple intelligences, and this theory is challenged. So he believes that there are certain people who are have a certain type of intelligence rather than others, like musical intelligence, interpersonal skills, verbal, linguistic, and with regard to language, logic smart or nature smart, so they think that there are people who are equipped with one intelligence in a higher degree than the other, or a personal variation of intelligence. We talked about Abraham's Maslow hierarchy of need, and the last thing that I want to talk about, because one of the students has asked about that, is the critical thinking skills. So a core aspect of the critical thinking skill involves analyzing and evaluating arguments. So it involves distinguishing component or part of an argument, assessing the strength or relevance of an argument, evaluating the credibility of evidence or a statement, recognizing assumptions, identifying formal policies, and identifying sound arguments. And we're going to talk about that in the course design in a way. We'll touch on it. Thank you for listening. I took most of the hour, so I didn't respect the time. I apologize. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. It was a very interesting presentation. Please, if you have any question, you can write them down in the chat box or raise your hand and unmute yourself to talk directly.
Sorry, Omnia, I didn't respond to your pleas to stop the lecturing. I don't look into the chat when
No, it's okay. It's okay. It was very engaging, a very engaging presentation. Thank you.
Can I have some comment, Omnia?
Okay, go on, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Sahar, for this very nice, informative. Really, I enjoyed it so much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
What message we try to deliver to the audience or to those who attend that course is that the learning process is different from what we learned with. As we stated in the module 1, usually the medical education is in development and continuous development, and therefore we cannot rely on things happened previously and it worked at that time to manage our times, and this is very important. I usually remember a statement, I cannot recall it exactly, but they said about learning and education is that we are working today using the curriculum of yesterday, designing to produce a doctor of tomorrow. And if we realize these 3 points, we are living today using the curriculum of yesterday, trying to creating a doctor of tomorrow. And that means that we should be in a continuous development process, continuous evaluation, quality control, quality assurance. And I think Dr. Sabih is with us, always focusing on the quality of learning, quality of learning. You point very few important key points in your presentation, and is that the learner should be an active part. This is a first very important step. The second thing is that the teaching methods. The teaching methods, and you said the clickers. Probably some of the attendees don't know what are the clickers. The voting system. هذه مثل اللي نسوي احنا الريموت مالت التلفزيون اللي ندوس به ارقام ونسوي فوتنج على اي ام سي كيو يطلع او على اي سؤال او على اي سيرفي. هذه تبقي الليرنر attached to the session, تبقي thinking all the time of what's going on. He is engaged in the process of learning. Thank you very much, Sahar. I will not go further. There are so many questions for you. Thank you. An excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sahar, there is a comment from Dr. Hassanin. Dr. Hassanin, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Sahar, Dr. Hilal, and Omnia, everyone looking after this medical education course.
Hello, Hassanin, how are you?
Thank you. I'm good, thank you. I'm calling you from my car in Oxford. I just returned from an emergency assessment, so I'm sorry, just by the side road. Just to say, a very interesting lecture. Dr. Sahar was our anatomy tutor in Iraq, in Baghdad, many years ago. And yeah, I really enjoyed her way of teaching over the years. I'm not saying how many years ago, but yeah, not very long. So good to see you here all, and I look forward to my lecture tomorrow around this time, I think.
Thank you. We will look forward to your lecture, Dr. Hassani.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassani. Dr. Sahar, there is a question from Dr. Basim. He said, what about the fifth learning theory, which is humanism learning theory?
As I indicated, it's actually, it's not only one learning theories, there is around 15 learning theories in the market. We actually use the theories that applies to medical education and science. So I cannot tackle all the theories in 1 hour lecture. As I said, there are too many of them, and there are theories that apply to humanism, and it's different, like there are different other theories. So I just tackled the ones that is related to medical education. Things that is related to humanity and humanism is not very much tackled by medical education. So that's why I cannot elaborate on them. As I said, I want to give focused lectures, so to encourage the cognitivism in one direction. So
yes, thank you so much. Anyone else, if you have any question, you can raise your hand or talk directly.
Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umayma. Thanks very much, Dr. Sahar, for this nice presentation. This is very good for us as an academician and as the teacher to understand the principle of teaching. But I think, as you mentioned, nowadays, all the trends going toward the student-centered. Even now, our teaching in the university is changed from the classical lecture given to the student to the what's called integrated system. And in the group, usually we ask the question, and these are open questions, and we allow the student to search through the net for the answer, then we discuss. So I think for our locality in Iraq, complete independency may be not very effective. Still, they need mentor, still they need supervisor, as you say. But of course, nowadays, we have to get benefit from the new technology, as you say, thousands of the sites for the gaining information, not like our time. If you remember, in 80s, we were searching for a book, an old version of a book, and sometimes it was expensive, we cannot buy it. But nowadays, free of charge, the student through the mobile phone or through the laptop, just if have a net, can get everything. So things are changed, and we have to change our method of teaching to the student and get benefit from the YouTube's video, other scientific sites. But of course, opening mind question may be very good, and let the student to search and read and raise question. Maybe this is the future way of learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad Omar, for the nice comment. As I indicated, the theories that I've mentioned or projected in a chronological order. So we started with behaviorism, and behaviorism, in my opinion, encouraged rote learning, but is still valid because there is a certain percentage, even if it might be small, in rote learning. You have to memorize the basic information. And then we moved to cognitivism, and now we are in the era of constructivism plus technology, which is connectivism. So we are moving forward, and maybe we will come with new more methods for assessment and teaching, as you indicated. The millennial generation is very much dependent on technology. I'm sure you noticed that. ما يجاوبك, but if you text him with WhatsApp, he will come.
Yes.
Answer will come right away. So this is something that we have to accommodate with if we want to stay in academia.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a comment here, Omnia, if you allow me.
Go ahead, Dr. Hilal.
Sahar, from the assignment of the first module, my assignment to the attendee is that what's your idea about the new curriculum, and what is the current curriculum at your medical schools, and whether it is teacher-centered or student-centered, and about medical education in it. I was surprised that some of the medical students were not with the student-centered approach. And they, as Dr. Muhammad said a few minutes ago, is that they found the environment, the preparation, the logistics are not very well achieved to start such a process. But I think that you explained very nicely the way from the behaviorism to cognitive, and then to the other theories. I think we may rely on cognitivism and to reshape the key information we want from the learner to know. Don't overwhelm them with so much data, with so much required knowledge. Therefore, they will lose their way, and they cannot differentiate between the simple or the important issues and whether the required points are of not very important or key points. I think we have to shift, and we have to insist as an educator to more advanced, more toward the student-centered. And I think you are practicing that, Sahar.
Well, Prof. Hilal, this is a very sore point that you've touched on. The problem is now with this pandemic, most of the teaching in schools is happening online. I don't know about Iraq and whether the students are back on campus. We are out of campus. And it is very convenient to many instructors to just bombard the student with a lot of referencing, references, teaching material, and ask him to go and read alone. But as you said, this is really, it's overwhelming for the student, and you cannot refine the information like that. So now the instruction is to rewrite your lectures and remove all the redundant part. So that is what they tell you in many of these academic sessions. Remove the redundant part, let the student focus on the main concept in order for him to learn. And I understand, I understand where the student frustration comes from. I mean, the student is sitting with all that material that he has to learn alone, and that's not an easy way. Not an easy task. For me, I do Zoom meetings like this for each lecture. So I am online and the student can see me and they can interact with me, and I update my Zoom program on a regular basis, so not to lose touch with the students. In addition to adding, loading or uploading the lecture notes on the university platform.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. I'm sure we can all relate to this. But before we go into the break, Dr. Sabih has a comment. Dr. Sabih, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry that I joined the lecture lately. Sorry, Dr. Sahar, I missed it. However, unfortunately, I think all the theories of learning will disappear in just a few years. Most of the studies now, they are changing. Even they say that the teaching is an obstacle for learning. And in Harvard University, they start to diminish or make teaching the less proportion in their educational process. And they are depending on the peer learning rather than the teaching itself. And I don't know, it will last for just a few years, maybe in developed country, but in our country, we may need these theories. They are theories. They are not, they are not a law. So I think the term teacher will not survive for more than 10 years, I think. So I hope we have to start focusing on the way that we facilitate the process rather than giving the instructions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabih. Apologies for the participants because we are supposed to have a 10-minute break. So we took a couple of minutes from you. So we are on break now and we will be back on 9:50. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to recognize the previous prior learning and his previous experience, and we want him to choose to learn and integrate new information with his prior knowledge. So the main stakeholders in any learning process are three: the instructor, the learner, and the course or the curriculum, as we stated earlier. And I'm going to start by talking about the students and what kind of students do we have in academia and in tertiary education. So there is a model for the students in tertiary education, and that model is called the Susan Robert model. Okay, so Susan is a very intrinsically motivated student, and she is at the university to learn. So she likes to get to the bottom of things, reach understanding. She often reflects on possibilities, implications, applications. You can see these are all higher cognitive skills. and consequences of what she is learning. And she is characterized by a preference for deep learning. And I'm going to answer that, what is deep learning, in a few slides, the next few slides. So Susan is characterized by preference to deep learning, and she uses spontaneously her higher cognitive processes. And faced with the curriculum, she comes to the lecture, she teaches herself and comes to the lecture very much ready to the lecture. She knows the basic information, and she has prepared her own questions, and she is unstoppable. Nobody can prevent her from learning. She is the example of an academic student. The other type of student is Robert. And I'm sorry they chose the boy, the male gender, to represent this kind of non-academic student. He is extrinsically motivated and not at the university to learn. So Robert doesn't really care about the learning itself. His goal is to have a university degree. He wants to pass exams, get the degree, and get a job. And he's characterized by preference for surface learning or rote learning. And now you can relate to what we said previously. And he only uses his cognitive processes when he has to. So he's not somebody who is not able to learn. He is a person who chooses to use rote learning or memorization in his tertiary education. He will cut short in achieving his goals, and those guys think that if they can collect several blocks or learning blocks from the lecture and memorize these, then they can pass the exams. So he usually his goal with minimum he wants to achieve his goal with minimum effort, and he sticks to lower cognitive activities, that is memorization and identification. So he has a preference or tendency to surface learning. So what is the problem? The problem is that previously, in the good old days, in the 50s and 60s, and I think many of our parents can relate to that, usually the class used to have a few students, and education was very expensive, and those students were very motivated, and they all used to represent what we know about the academic student. Now, when the number of students had increased in a particular year, we started having more of the non-academic student, the Robert model. So what is good teaching? Good teaching is trying your best as an instructor to minimize the difference between the academic learner and the non-academic learner. In other words, you try to engage them, you try to engage the non-academic learner in certain type of activities that encourage him and stimulate him to use his higher cognitive functions. Besides, it is no more possible to say that I taught the student, but he didn't learn. So you cannot claim that the student cannot learn. That is, your role as an instructor in the class is to minimize the difference by, how do we do that? By course alignment and designing outcome-based courses, and aligning our teaching and learning, what is known as constructive alignment. So in a good system, all aspects of teaching, assessment are tuned or is gauged to support high-level learning, so that the students are encouraged to use higher order learning process. And constructive alignment is such kind of a system. It's an approach to course design or curriculum design to give optimal conditions for quality learning. Who is the leader or who is the founder of this theory? The founder of the theory is John Biggs, and I think he is Australian or a New Zealander. I don't recall that fact anymore. And he is adamant that higher education must allow students to construct and learn deeply their understanding of concepts in different ways that is still within the broad structure of the broad structures and the outcomes of the course. These structures, it ranges, or learning ranges from poor understanding to the most desirable outcomes, and that is to achieve deep learning. One of the students in our preparatory sessions for these lectures said something nice, that he said, I want to know what is deep learning. So this is a comparison. I hope these lectures will answer that question. So this is a very basic comparison between surface and deep learning. Surface learning is rote learning. You memorize the ideas, and it's isolated facts, not linked very properly. You do not establish good connections between your ideas. And if some of these ideas gets forgotten, then you pass to the point of non-learning. It's as you didn't pass the university. Formula and procedures, you memorize all that. Student want to pass he does factual recall and just recall the information that is given in the lecture. He must have recorded it or have written some notes. And transmission modes is just the basic information is transmitted as a chain from the instructor to the learner. In deep learning, you make an understanding and you make meaning and relational. And I'll give in the next slide and some kind of an explanation. I'll try to touch on what deep learning means. So the students are curious, interactive, productive, and the teachers use active methods, and the student is able to form connections between the ideas and the concepts that he acquires during the learner process. There is something called structure of observed learning outcomes. And that structure have, 5 stages, from pre-structural and connected ideas to unistructural, simple, like that one here, obvious connections, multi-structural, where there are many connections that are made between the ideas, and relational level, and this relational, you relate the part to the whole, and extended abstract, where it goes beyond to generalize the principles. So that is the highest level. So this is we move from unistructural to multistructural, and we are able to establish connections. How do we go about that? If you look into that, this is taken from a paper. It's a kind of student answers, 5 students who are sitting in the same class, and they have, of course, the same prior learning, and they are exposed to that question. And the question is, why is the side of the mountain that faces the coast usually wetter than the side that's facing the interior? So the first answer, he says, where we live, it is like this. Everybody knows that it is the case. We go there in summer and it is wet, but not on the other side of the mountain. So he basically repeated what the question had stated. The second answer had added something. He said it's because the sea breeze hits the seaside of the mountain first before they hit the other side. Where we live, it is like this, and then he continues. So he had added one sentence, and so he was able to make more a unistructural relation to the question. The third answer was air from the sea is moist. It has to go up the mountain before it gets to the other side. And if it loses and its dampness on the side, it hits first, then there is not much for the other side. So this is why the C side is the wetter side, and that is multi-structural. And then we move to the other person who demonstrate, the fourth student and the fifth student, they demonstrate a more connections and more knowledgeable information, which denotes their ability to integrate ideas and to add their own perception of the question. So we wanted the student to reach that fifth level of integration. And that is what that is the ability to make connection between the ideas and add new knowledge and add his own interpretation of the question. So what is effective teaching? Effective teaching is the one that brings about the intended learning outcomes of the course. And it creates a situation or selecting a lifelike situation to enhance learning, showing, telling, giving instruction, making someone understand in order to learn, although understanding is a very vague term if you put it in your course design, imparting knowledge and skills required to master the subject matter. So this is what the effective teaching is. And effective teachers believe that learning occurs primarily as a direct result of individual differences between learners. So, and that's why we have this problem-based inquiry where the students sit and ask to discuss their notes and this small group discussions, because they believe that learning occurs as, like students learn differently. So learning is a primary result of appropriate teaching, but it's also as a result of individual differences between the students. And learning happens as a result of learning very focused activities. When we design a course, we have to underpin the theories of learning. That's very important. And the ultimate goal of any teaching situation is that the student learn whatever they are supposed to learn. So learning is usually a very vague concept though, and it may refer to both learn about and learn to do. We want in our courses to focus on the outcome, not on the income. So it is not what you want to tell them, the content that you want to teach or you want them to learn about. It is how about to achieve that. So the outcomes should be always student-centered. So it is what the student should learn. That is the outcome. It's not lecturer focused or lecturer centered. It's not what you want to teach them, it's what you want them to learn. The approach to course design begin with the question, what do we want the student to be able to do as a result of learning? So the intended learning outcomes for the students then become the objectives for designing the curriculum and the course. So we start where do we start with course design? The realistic answer is to start from the beginning. The right answer is to start from the end, and that is the learning outcomes. Very constructive and very useful course design takes place when you align the learning objectives, your learning outcome, your teaching activities, and your assessments. And that is what is known as constructive alignment. How do we do that? First of all, you have to distinguish what kind of knowledge you want them to learn. Is it knowledge about things? A knowledge that we can declare to someone in writing or telling, and whether it is a functional knowledge to put to work, solving physical problem, analyzing, making an argument, So what is the and to which percentage? So for example, in anatomy, you need to have some bit of declarative knowledge. It's not all clinically applied knowledge. So you want a declarative knowledge. You want the student to know a bit. So you decide on that. How much do you want him to rote learn, and how much application do you want him to have? So the course design, you have to learn when you define the intended learning outcome. That's the end part of the course, or the end result of the course. You need to know where the course is going, because otherwise you will not go anywhere. So you have to have a vision for the course. So you define the intended learning outcome, and the way to define that, you define the contents, and you define how deep the student needs to learn the contents. So the way to do that is to use the active action verbs that is listed in Bloom's taxonomy. And you create a learning environment that is likely to engage the student through very much aligned learning activities to help to bring about the intended learning outcomes. So it is not only the learning outcomes, you have to design the activities of the course. And the last thing is to use certain assessment tasks to see whether the student has achieved the intended learning outcome. And these can, of course, this judgment can be either obtained through formative assessment throughout the course, and then you can also use it through summative assessment. Dr. Sabih will talk about that in his lecture. So the constructive alignment of the course is the first thing. It starts, you can see that the block is, it has that thick line around it. So that starts with your intended learning outcome. So you decide on how good you want to know this intended learning outcome. Highly satisfactory, moderately satisfactory. You decide the level of learning. You can see this from deep to more superficial. This is how you decide on the level of cognition and how deep you want to know each of these contents of the course. How do you do that? You also design, after deciding on that, you design learning activities that align with the intended learning outcomes, and then you design assessment tasks that align with the intended learning outcomes and the teaching and learning activities. Let's put that into a chart that is, I think it will help you to understand. So the knowledge has 4 types. There is 4 basic types of knowledge that you want your medical and science students to know. And these are the factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, concepts as in physiology, factual knowledge as in anatomy. Physiology is more conceptual. That's why students do not like it as much as anatomy. Anatomy allows rote learning, so they can get away with it. Procedural knowledge and metacognitive knowledge. And these are the action verbs that is noted from in Bloom's taxonomy, from the least complex to the more complex. So if you see, if I'm teaching first year and second year students, so I want my learning outcomes to be very much towards the lower cognitive level. I mean, I'm not going to ask the student to create and analyze in first year. He will start crying in the exam. So you start with the lower cognitive functions. You test the lower cognitive function, and you design a teaching activity that slightly exceed that level. So if my learning outcomes involves remembering and understanding, my teaching and learning activities should include applying this information that he learned in the lecture. So I move a little bit with the cognition, and then the assessment task should go very much parallel to the learning activity or slightly higher. As I told you, you have to train the student to gradually, when you give him a high cognition learning activity, the students do not feel, they feel overwhelmed and they feel angry and anxious. If you bring a question, then it entails higher cognition, while your intended learning outcome states that he has to learn it at a particular level, like applying. These three levels, the analysis, the evaluation, and the creation, is not very much used in medical education. And that's why you got very overwhelmed when I submitted the assignment to you, because I'm trying to push you to that level here. So this is something that you train the student on gradually, and the ultimate aim of your education is to push the student towards deep learning, because that is when he will be able to criticize, critically think, and he can construct new knowledge. In addition, while you're moving him from, in a nutshell, you're moving him from being non-academic to a highly academic student. The course design is very much similar to a clothesline. And why do we represent it by a clothesline? Because these things, or the clothes that is hung on a wash line, you can usually change the sequence of it and test its validity and relevance. And you can keep what is valid and discard what you find or deemed irrelevant, or it loses its validity with time. So it is something that is very much liable for change. So the way to do that is to identify the student prior knowledge. As I said, you can have many students who are coming from secondary education, grade 12, but their prior knowledge varies. And in all these informal sessions and group discussion, we try to test the prior knowledge. Now you would ask, how do we test the prior knowledge? For example, I'm teaching the nervous system, then I give these sticker papers, something like this yellow piece of paper, and I ask each student to write 5 concepts on the nervous system. And then I would be able to assess what they know about the nervous system before I start explaining the nervous system. So, and there, I'm sure you know that there are certain topics in that is a bit neglected in secondary school education, like the lymphatic system, for example. So there, you test the prior knowledge of the student, and then you introduce a new material that facilitate meaningful learning. And what does that mean here? Meaningful learning means the integration of the new learned material with his prior knowledge, because it's highly likely that he chooses non-learning and then he sticks to his prior knowledge. So you need to encourage the student to integrate the newly taught material with the old one. And that is what is all about designing a proper course. So where to start? You can see I put the intended learning outcome, and that's the end. So you start from the end. And then you start establishing the units in your course design. So of course, you're going to document the change that happened through the process, through your assessments. And without measuring the prior learning, the teaching is locked up in a structure of terminology that is not accessible to the student. So the student has these building blocks and he has to build on it. If he cannot relate what you are teaching him to his prior knowledge or built on it, then you're not achieving what you are intended from the course. So
عفوا دكتورة سحر إذا تسمحي لي بس ممكن تكبرين أكو ريكوست من الأودينس you're doing full screen. أكو هذا الكأس اللي موجود عندك إذا ترجعين على
Did I end show and start again?
أكو لا هو كأس جوا موجود إذا تدوسين عليه تصير full screen لأنه الفيو صغير ده يبين عندنا.
دكتورة غيري البرزنتر فيو يعني end show واختاري غير فيو.
أي هو هذا اللي راح يصير. فيو نورمال.
دكتورة هذا اللي يم التصغير والتكبير على الجهة اليمين أقصى اليمين اللي جوا.
دكتورة سحر أسفل شيء هذا الكأس هذا الكأس لا بعد روحي to the left. هذا الكأس اي that's it. ايه
هذا
yes yes
okay full screen. So what is the prior knowledge? That is what the student have learned or achieved in their usually grade 12 secondary education, and where you want them to be, that is your intended learning outcome. And that the point between these two is your transformation, that is the learning process or the zone of proximal development. We said that we want the student to reach that stage with the most knowledgeable other to be an independent learner and to establish the connection, the proper connection. So this is a very good model of teaching and learning. If you can see the teacher, the expert, and he presents the information, of course, in a lecture, but you have to remember that it's not only the lecture that is there. You can design, there is a lot of properly designed teaching and learning activities that can help the lecturer and help the student in emerging from emerging as an expert from being a novice. So the novice is the beginner, and he emerging as an expert or an emerging expert, not a full expert. That means that he will be able to establish some connections between these learning blocks. So as opposed to the other model, when he always decide to learn by rote learning, and then of course this is the same narrated chain that he had learned from the lecturer, and which he will tend to forget over time, or sometimes he would forget some of the blocks of that knowledge, and then it's also very similar to it is as non-learning. So where their prior knowledge and where do we want them to be, that's the intended learning outcome. And then we start, why it's called the wash line, we start putting these units across the wash line. So, and these units are, of course, they are not fixed. You can change the arrangement of these units. And also with each unit, you can decide how deep that you want the student to learn the topic. So this is basically, each unit will form a particular topic or a particular content. And then you start by doing the subunit. You decide on the contents of subunit. You build the course material. You build the teaching and learning activities, and you build the assessment tasks for each unit. Of course, all this should be aligned. So the intended learning outcome should align with your teaching and learning activity, and it should align with your assessments. So the what do we mean alignment? We mean that we test at the same level or slightly higher. This is an outcome-based approach to learning. We define the outcome to the students because we think that defining the outcome to the students will encourage the students to learn. So teaching to facilitate attaining the learning outcomes. Usually it is what are the students has to do, the intended learning outcomes, and assessment, how well the student has attained the intended learning outcomes. So you put your learning outcomes, that is it's the end of the process in itself, but we use it as a start. And you design your teaching to align with the intended learning outcome, and you design your assessment to align with your intended learning outcome. So and this, how do we define that? We define that by the verbs. So the action verbs. One word, one advice, don't use vague verbs like understand. Understand is not really a very definitive verb. It can mean many things. So we use a more defined verbs that can measure the intended learning outcome. So the intended learning outcome should be well defined and measurable. You can measure it. And you state what the students are expected to be able to do after studying the course program. It's always expressed from the student perspective. You can look at that when you, this is one or two of the lectures. I think I projected that earlier. And you can see here when we write the learning outcome, we say the student should be able to describe, identify, list, learn. So you show in your lecture, you spell very well the intended learning outcome. So what information you want him to know and at which level you want him to know. And of course, this intended learning outcome and the action verb should entail higher cognitive levels as when your study advances. So the course that you design to first-year students and second-year students will include a lot of list and describe, while when you are at your final years, you need the student to be able to construct and analyze. So you aim higher with your course design. Of course, the intended learning outcomes is very much related to the criteria for assessing the student. There is, of course, you have to align also your course intended learning outcome with the program intended learning outcome. How does that happen? Usually the staff members, the teaching staff members meet and check whether the courses are aligned. There is vertical alignment and horizontal alignment with the program of with the program that is the medical program that is taught in medical universities. And we check also, is the weighing appropriate for the course? Usually 1 credit hour is 10 hours of course activity. So if the course is 10 credits, you must have 100 hours of course activity. And if it is 20 credits, that's 200 hours of course activities. So your course should reflect that the credits should be very much related. The weighing is appropriate and the credits are related to the course activities. Is there any gaps? For example, when I looked into this course in medical education, I decided that I'm going to talk about concept mapping somewhere in my lectures because I didn't see it very apparent on the program. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to explain it in 1-2 slides and maybe my colleagues can add to that. So the procedure in designing the course intended learning outcome, decide on what knowledge is to be taught. Sorry, I'm repeating that because it's very important to know that, whether it's functional knowledge or declarative knowledge. Select the topics that is taught, all the units, these are the topics or the contents, but you don't project the course as just list of contents. That's not okay because that will confuse the student. He will be overwhelmed. He won't know what to learn. You have to be specific and define your intended learning outcome through the use of action verbs. You have to spell out what he needs to learn. So decide on the level of understanding, performance of the student expected to achieve, and consider if all the learning outcomes are of equal importance. Ensure a clear understanding of the agreement on the intended learning outcome. And the last thing is you have to communicate that to the students. And I'm going to show you now how to communicate that to the students at the end of this lecture. So designing teaching and learning activity to align with the intended learning outcome. So when I gave you the lecture on the literature review, my learning activity was a bit higher than the intended learning outcome. If you have noticed, the intended learning outcome was somehow in the middle. The designed assignment is slightly higher to keep you in that zone of proximal development. And I think I am allowed to do that because most of you are final years medical students. So you have moved with your education. The best to do this is to activate the verbs or the learning activities intended for the learning outcome. So you can be parallel and you can go slightly above, but you cannot go below. when you design your teaching and learning activity. All these teaching and learning activity can be used as an assessment method. So they would describe, you can give reading for the student, you can give a lecture followed by a presentation, explain, tutorial, written essay, he can write an essay to explain, integrate, project, assignment, apply, project, case study, solve a problem, that is problem-based learning, case study, design and create, project, creative writing, and hypothesize an experiment or a project, and reflect a reflective diary. So all these are teaching and learning activities, and there are many, many more. And these teaching and learning activities can also use as a way to assess the students. We usually give marks to the projects. Sometimes it's part of our formative learning, and although it is not advisable to give marks for the formative assessment, but we give a few marks for the projects as to motivate the students to do the project. So we provide the students, the assessment task provide the students the opportunity to demonstrate what they have achieved and to what level their performance is. So I asked Umnia to ask you all to attempt to the assignment. It is so that we learn through our differences, and there is no single right answer. Some students will come with answers that I don't know myself or never thought about. So this is the assessment task should be very appropriately designed, and different assessment methods addresses different intended learning outcome. So it's better to have several kinds of tasks. So it's not enough, for example, to give him an essay that it talks to his writing abilities, but maybe you need more types of formative assessment, like MCQs, and to test his understanding and depth of understanding of the course. And of course, when you design the assessment task, this will help you to judge the student performance. Although there are many education systems that has moved away from the assessment. So the assessment only happens at grade 12 at the final levels of whether primary or secondary education. But I think it is also a form of behaviorism because it is associated with marks. So punishment and reward, and most of the education systems are trying to move away from that. But the assessment gives you, if it is well designed, not any assessment, it can give you an idea of how much grasping of the topic has done. So that is the way to design a bad assessment. So if the teacher intention is to construct and analyze as it is stated in the course design, and this is the student activity is to name and recite, that is what he learned, rote learning, just rote learning. So he uses lower cognitive function. And if you bring him to name and recite while you ask him to, in the course design, to construct and analyze, you are encouraging surface learning. So the students who are the academic students will not be very happy with such type of a test because they will pass it easily. The non-academic student will pass, but you are encouraging them now to practice and continue on doing what they are doing. So if the teacher intention as stated in the module organizer is to construct and analyze, and the student learning is to construct and analyze. The academic student can construct and analyze, and then you bring questions at the same level that will encourage deep learning. So your intention is conducted through the course design and also through the teaching activities. So your teaching activities should help the student to construct and analyze the knowledge. So, and then when you test the student, you prepare an assessment. The assessment should be set at the same level of the intended learning outcomes, because that is what encourages deep learning. You stimulate the student to adopt deep learning. And I remember in one of the medical schools, in one of the countries that I taught in, for the first assessment, the success rate was 30%. And then the head of department was not very happy. So, and then he came to ask me about that. And I said, just wait until the end of the year. And the students' the success rate increased to 70% in the mid-year exam. And finally, it was 95%. Because now the students learn that this is, I don't want them to just memorize. I don't want the rote learning. My questions are at a higher level than that. So we try slowly but surely encourage the student to think and think deeply. I must say that I was overwhelmed by the number of the students when I taught at Baghdad Medical School. I mean, I remember we were 360, but I haven't taught 360 students in one hall for some time now. So what is the problem with that type of a class? The problem with it is there is a lack of opportunity for student questions. The interaction between the student and the lecturer is very minimal. So there is a real difficulty in achieving student-centered learning. And the lack of tools with which you can measure the student learning quality. I mean, clickers will be very useful in this type. There is something that the student can use with their mobile called Polls Everywhere. So it's very similar to the clickers. So the lecturer can project some MCQs for these high classes and see whether they have mastered the contents of the lecture and the concepts that he wants them to master at which level. The other way is to you show that your intentions to the student is through something called concept mapping. And I said to you in the beginning that I looked into the course and I found that it wasn't mentioned anywhere, so I decided to explain it. So this concept mapping is one of the ways to achieve meaningful learning and cross-quality in larger classes or larger groups. What is concept mapping? It is mapping out the knowledge structure or the key concepts of the module. So you actually show the student your vision of the module or the path and what you want them to achieve. So the teachers map their understanding of the topic to give the student an access to the complexity and the richness of the knowledge. So you are basically drawing this connection between the blocks. It's like a mind map. And it will enrich their simple narrative explanation. So what is a concept map? This is a concept map to show what the concept map is. So a concept map helps to explain the intended learning outcome. We said that each course has an intended learning outcomes, and these are the outcomes that you want the student to achieve by the end of the course. So the concept map represents organized knowledge, and it looks very much similar to what you are looking at. So it helps to answer the focus questions of the course, and are context dependent, and it helps in effective learning and effective teaching. So what happens? The concept map can learn the concepts or what the teacher wants the student to learn, but you can also ask the student at the end of the course to construct a concept map of what he understood from that course. Or what did he understood and what was what did he achieve from the course? So he shows his learning outcome and how much did he master of, what is the mastery of the contents. So it comprises of concepts, and it is linked by linking words. And so you basically, it's a map, it's a mind map, and a design for your course. And they can be used for the identification of a prior knowledge structure. So like, for example, you're telling the student the nervous system, which is made of the nerve cell, and then the nerve cell is related or communicate with other nerve cell, and then it forms, this forms the nervous system, and then you put more blocks to the function of the nervous system, and that is, you link all the information. So you establish blocks of knowledge, and you link it through linking verbs, and these verbs are represented on the arrows. So in a mind map or in a concept map, you show him what are you going to teach him, and where is this course going to. So it it serves for identifying the prior knowledge structure, because at the beginning of your course, you can give the student, as I said, stickers, but you can also teach him how to do a concept map and ask him to draw what he knows about the nervous system. How can he represent his knowledge of the nervous system? So you can identify his prior knowledge, and you maybe whenever he learns a new topic regarding the nervous system, he adds the blocks to this mind map. So the presentation of a new material in a way that facilitates meaningful learning. We usually can put they ask us in our courses to put a concept map in the beginning of each module to show where the actual understanding of the course, and usually the student requests that they want that concept maps. It helps them in understanding where the course is going. Sharing of expert knowledge and the connection. So what you fail to present in the lecture, and these are the connections, you are sharing that in the concept map. So you document knowledge change to show the integration of student prior knowledge and where the teaching is leading him to. Okay, so that's the final slide in my presentation. I think I can get some water now. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. So as always, your presentations are the dearest to my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'll be selfish and I'll ask you a question first before the participants. So
okay.
This module is about learning, right? And learning is important. And actually, Leonardo da Vinci has said, learning never exhausts the mind. So can you give us, the students, a piece of advice that you personally regard as important regarding learning?
I think one of the pieces.
Stop sharing the screen, please.
Okay. Okay, we're back.
Okay, very good.
I think one of the piece advices is that I do that sometimes when you're studying, and you know the medical curriculum is a heavy curriculum, and then when you face something that you don't understand very well, you tend to rote learning. You might just memorize the slide, and you might think this is not grave. In our university, it's grave. I've seen students who memorize math questions. So it is, don't be tempted to memorize. Whatever you don't understand, try to dig deeply and learn the basis behind it. On the other hand, we have many lecturers who give classes to grade 12 students, and in these classes, they teach them the basic concepts. They don't solve problems with them. So they think if the basic concepts are mastered, you can solve anything. And when I went to the States in Missouri, there is a class which tackles the concepts of engineering, and they administer it to 4-year-old children. So, for example, you don't need to know that the area of a circle is have نصف القطر تربيع في النسبة الثابتة. They teach them how did that happen? How did they get to that conclusion or that equation? So understanding the basics is very important. It helps in establishing all these connections.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. Indeed. Okay, so dear participants, your comments and your questions are all welcome. So you can just type them down in the chat box or raise your hand and unmute yourself right away. Okay, so Dr. Mustafa Abbas, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Omnia, and thank you so much for Dr. Sahar. I have a question about your comment. You said that people like in other countries know what is the knowledge behind the natural science. How can we put that thing in our countries? I mean, is it that hard to learn the things behind the basic sciences? Because I think we lack this knowledge, as we only like learn and study the hard and complex things, and we forget to know and study what is the principle behind the basic knowledge in whatever the science was, medicine or engineering or whatever the science. So what do you think, how could we implement this type of learning in our curriculum or in our life?
It needs more time and effort dedicated for that. This is the problem. You know, it needs more time that is dedicated to teaching and learning. So these are done by experts, and it targets younger age group, and they start with the basic concepts or the background behind basic theories, basic equations, but it really creates a powerful thinker. Because once you understand the basis of the questions, I mean, I know somebody who was one of our academic professors, and he used to teach grade 12, and he doesn't solve the problems with them. He just teach them the basics of physics and the basics of maths and chemistry, and how these basics are constructed. And so and he thinks this is the way. It's instead of making them solve the problem, understand the basic knowledge behind it. Needs time and effort, and it needs a more staff recruitment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar and Mustafa. So any other questions or comments?
Omnia, if you allow me just to have...
Yes, Dr. Hilal, go ahead.
أنا أعتقد الموضوع يعني يجب أن يؤخذ بجدية، خصوصا من طلاب كليات الطب والأطباء المتخرجين جدد. راح أتكلم بالعربي حتى تكون شوية الأمور أقرب. موضوع الفهم وعدم الاعتماد على الدرخ وعلى الميموري وتذكر المعلومة فقط. من نحاول نغير هذا الموضوع، نشوف اكو ريزيستنس، وهذا الريزيستنس تاتي من عده اطراف. تاتي من الطلاب اولا، لانه هم يعتقدون بانه اسهل طريقه للقرايه مثل ما تعلموها بالثانويه هي الميمورايزيشن والحفظ او الدرخ، وبالتالي يعني they can pass and get high marks by this methods. في نفس الوقت faculty members, not all of them are trained on the new theories and concepts of learning, teaching and learning, and therefore they are resistant to design a course like Dr. Sahar elegantly demonstrated, is that we start from the end. This is the graduate from a medical school. ما هي المواصفات التي يجب أن تتوفر في هذا الخريج، وبالتالي أحددها، وبالتالي تكون على شكل outcomes, intended learning outcomes، وتتحول إلى learning objectives، وبعدين أستخدم الماتيريال اللي أوصل الطالب لهاي learning outcomes، وأختار طرائق التدريس المناسبة، وأختار طريقة الأسسمنت المناسبة اللي دكتورة سحر ذكرتها بالconstructive alignment. إحنا غايتنا من هاي الكورسات واللي هي for the first time addressing medical students is that إنه الطالب هو صاحب الشأن وصاحب القضية في هذا الموضوع. يجب عليه أن يدرك أنه الموضوع يحتاج إلى أنه فهم، يحتاج إلى أنه يطبق، يحتاج يربط المعلومة البيزك ويا المعلومة الكلينيكال، ويعرف أهمية المعلومة البيزكس شنو تفيده من يصير صف رابع وصف خامس وصف سادس. وبالتالي هو صاحب القضية ويتبنى هاي القضية ويدفع باتجاهها. هي هاي الفكرة حقيقة من إقامة هاي الكورسات. البرزنتيشن كان بديع جدا، عاشت إيديش دكتورة سحر، وأيضا كان المودريشن من أمنية. as usual it was perfect. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hilal. So, sorry, Dr. Sahar. Before we close, Dr. Yasser has a question. In our course, which learning theory do we depend on?
All of them are valid. You can decide on which theory that serves you the most. Maybe if you are, for example, I'm teaching anatomy, I still need some rote learning, some behaviorism, and some cognitivism. So because my course doesn't allow a lot of constructivism, if you understand what I mean. So it depends on which theory serves you. If you are doing engineering, then constructivism is the theory that serves you the most. So it depends on the discipline. It's very much discipline oriented, but all the four theories are valid. So however, behaviorism should not be encouraged. Why? As Dr. Hilal said, we don't إياكم ثم إياكم ثم إياكم من الاعتماد على الميمورايزيشن والحفظ. ليش السبب؟ لأنه هذا أولاً it's not very much adopted in the West. Then you will, if you base your knowledge on memorization, you will be bombarded with the questions that you cannot answer. So be ready. I can give an example for that. Suppose you're learning about lymphedema, and you know that lymphedema is a limb enlargement as a result of, can be either primary, hereditary, and then secondary due to parasitic infection or surgery. Then one of the, and you are presenting, and of course that is what your professor told you, who also comes from a behaviorism system. And then one of the audience raises his hand and he asks you, but he tells you, I know two patients, both of them had the same extent of the cancer, and both of them had undergone the same operation, but one developed lymphedema and the second one didn't develop lymphedema. So why? So you have to, here you will be challenged, because you will need a very much extensive basic knowledge and basic background and knowledge of research to be able to answer that to his question. So that is why we don't encourage behaviorism and rote learning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. So I guess we have approached the end of today's session. Thank you so much for attending today. Feel free to reach us through all social media if you have a question in mind. We hope that you have learned something new today. Learning is a lifestyle, so keep learning and keep growing. And we are looking forward to seeing you tomorrow with two extinguished psychiatrists talking about the active and passive learning and learning style. So thank you so much.
Thank you to all.
شكرا جزيلا، أبدعتم.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور.
شكرا أمنية، شكرا.
شكرا لكم جميعا. شكرا أستاذ سعد.
Thank you.